Welcome back. In Kenya, fuel prices have risen once again after the government partially removed subsidies that cushioned consumers from the global hike in oil prices. According to Kenya's energy regulator, the subsidy for super petrol had been removed while retaining a smaller subsidy for diesel and kerosene. At the new prices, super petrol, which is mostly used by private motorists, will now cost about 179 shillings, which is about $1.50 a litre, up from $1.03, while diesel, which is used by transporters and industries, will cost about $1.40 in the capital, Nairobi. But what impact will this have on businesses? Matt Kindiger, practice lead, Sub-Saharan Africa Frontier View, joins me from London to discuss this. Hello, Matt. Good to have you again.
Hi, great to be on the show today.
Matt, why has the government slashed fuel subsidies this much when oil prices are skyrocketing so much in Africa?
Right. So it is quite a controversial time because global oil prices and domestic fuel prices in Kenya and across sub-Saharan Africa are quite high, especially by recent historical standards. So when we compare to oil prices when we compare oil prices to 2020 and 2021, we really have seen a significant increase. So there are a couple of reasons why we think this is happening right at this moment. So the global oil prices have come down slightly since June, and so this is probably a window of opportunity that the government is seeing to take advantage of lower oil prices to reduce the subsidy bill. But there are probably two other factors as well. One is that we had an election recently in Kenya. The election period is now past. So the new government under William Ruto now has a bit more political space to make politically difficult decisions, which are potentially quite unpopular with the electorate. For example, removing fuel subsidies or reducing fuel subsidies. So the timing is very important. And the other reason is that this illustrates the fiscal pressures that the government is facing. So there are quite significant pressures on the government's public finances at the moment. And this was likely just a decision made in order to prevent the fuel subsidy bill from spiraling out of control.
So you mentioned the public finances now. So what's the outlook for public finances? What does this mean for that?
Certainly. So yes, it really does illustrate the pressure that public finances are under at the moment. What we expect to happen over the next year or so is because of the scale of the pressure on public finances in Kenya, Mr. Ruto's new administration will likely be forced into cutting spending and investment, or raising taxes, or a combination of all three, and tightening revenue collection. And this is because the budget deficit is very large. It was estimated to be about, over 8% of GDP over the last fiscal year, and is expected to exceed 5, maybe 6% through the end of this fiscal year. So certainly very significant pressures there. The government has been forced into bailing out state-owned enterprises like Kenya Power and Kenya Airways. So certainly significant pressure there, and we are expecting not extreme austerity measures, but much less generous spending growth from the government over the next year or so. This is also very important because Mr. Ruto will need to ensure that investors have improved confidence in the government's ability to manage public finances, not least because the shilling is likely to come under significant pressure if he doesn't do that, and if the administration doesn't do that. And in the worst case scenario, we could see Kenya facing some form of debt distress as early as Q1 or Q2 next year, if there isn't significant consolidation of public finances. So really, it is quite an urgent matter for the government.
So given these recent developments in Kenya, how high do you think inflation is going to reach in the country?
Yeah, certainly. So Kenya's inflation rate has actually been relatively muted by sub-Saharan African standards and also by global standards. So we certainly have seen an acceleration to about 8% recently, but this is quite low by comparative standards across the region. However, that said, we are expecting to see inflation continue to accelerate, and it could exceed 10% year on year by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And this is because we actually are expecting oil prices here at Frontier View to continue to rise. And so the removal of the fuel subsidy, for example, or the reduction in the fuel subsidy will then be felt when oil prices begin to rise again. We also are expecting to see global food prices rise. And in Kenya, the country is struggling with a drought in the east of the country, which is reducing food production and also raising domestic food prices. So certainly we would expect an average inflation rate of between 8 and 10% in 2023, and probably about 6% in 2024. But certainly, we would expect to see inflation accelerate before it falls over the coming months.
Matt, inflation is really skyrocketing. Nigeria just recorded a 20.52% inflation rate yesterday, and we're still, trying to process and digest that information. Probably we'll talk about and break that down some other time. But it's always good to talk to you, Matt. Good to speak to you today.
Thanks for having me on the show.